everyone. We're here today with Nicole. I'm so excited that she's here. Her and I have been friends for a while now, I think even pre-COVID. So I've kind of followed Nicole's journey as she was in the classroom, out of the classroom, transitioning to be a BCBA. So she's got lots of different experience, but I will let her introduce herself a little bit more in depth of whatever she wants to share about who she is. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Heather. Thank you for having me on. And I have to say, when I sat down to prepare for this, I kind of had a moment of, oh my gosh, I've been a BCBA for almost 3 years, which is crazy. So I have 12 years of experience overall, and I have quite the array of experience. I don't think a lot of people know this, but I started out as a teaching assistant in a high school. Then I moved to be in a self-contained classroom for children with autism, grades 3 through 5. I then moved to a center where I primarily worked with early childhood students for 2 years, and now I'm a BCBA with my clients ranging from ages 3 to 17. So I really have experience all over the board. And of course, as a BCBA, primary focus on behavior, but I feel like a lot of hats that I wear as well.
Yeah. So Nicole's going to be here to talk a little bit more about behavior plans and behavior goals. So I feel like she was a really great person to bring on, has lots of knowledge in the field from being a teacher, understanding where a lot of you are coming from, to making that transition to be a BCBA, and who has that data lens, that behavior lens that we all know and love for our BCBAs that we work with. So for maybe some new teachers that don't understand what a behavior plan, can you just kind of break it down for us a little bit? Like, what is a behavior plan, and how do we know like if a student needs one?
Absolutely. So the first thing I'm going to say is don't feel overwhelmed because we know that special education has its own acronyms. Behavior has its own vocabulary outside of that. So you'll often hear it called a BIP. I remember the first time I went to an IEP and someone's like, "So where's the BIP?" And I'm like, "That's not on my sheet of terms. I don't know what that is."
I didn't bring it. Did you bring it? I don't know.
It stands for Behavior Intervention Plan. So that's what they're talking about. And that's a
Hmm.
great question, Heather. Who needs a behavior intervention plan? Very few kids need it. So the way I like to look at it is that same tiered process that we look at when we're giving support for reading or math. I use that same lens when I'm looking at a child who might have intervening behavior. So
Hmm.
our tier 1 kids are kids that are responding to whatever classroom-wide or school-wide reinforcement already exists. So I know at my school, classes could earn, our mascot was sharks, so they could earn shark teeth. And when the
Hmm.
whole class got 20 shark teeth, then they could decide if they had a pajama day or bringing their teddy bear day or movie day. That would
Hmm.
be an example of a class-wide behavior support system. If the child is able to participate in that system with no modifications, that is all that they need. They're at that tier 1. They don't need an intervention plan. The
Hmm.
already existing protocols are working. Let's look at tier 2. That's our kids who maybe need a little bit more support. So these are your friends that maybe are going to do like a check in, check out thing at the beginning and the end of the day. Or maybe they
Hmm.
just need a checklist to help them remember everything they need for class. Some of those additional supports that you're layering in that help them be successful, but it's really nothing too specialized. It's nothing too major, just a little bit of element that you put in here or there. They also don't need their intervention plan. We're looking at is a tier 3 student. So this is a student whose behavior is impacting their ability to access their classroom and their education. And this is a big thing that I'm a stickler on. The student is struggling to access their classroom.
Hmm.
This is not a teacher is irritated by something that the student is doing. And that's something that I see common is like, oh, well, the student makes too much noise, or the student, they do this or do that. Well, if they're still getting all of their work done, they're making progress,
Hmm.
they're establishing and maintaining friendships, that is not a time for an intervention plan. An intervention plan is specifically to help students whose behavior is impacting them in a negative way that's
Hmm.
prohibiting them from making progress. And so that's when we're going to start to look at that more specialized intervention that supports their unique needs.
Yeah, that individualized plan is so crucial when you do get to that point. Like you said, there are steps that you should be taking prior to that. That's a classroom-wide protocol or some type of classroom management system. And then, yes, the check in and check out, I feel like, are so effective. And sometimes we do miss those. So if you are considering a plan for a student that you are working with, make sure you are putting those things in place to say, like, I have tried a whole group thing. I have tried checking in and checking out with that student when a session happens or a whole day, whatever kind of instruction that they might need at that time, before we've gone and said, "We formally need an FBA." Did we define what an FBA is?
Not yet, we will, don't worry.
Great. Okay, just wanna make sure. Getting a lot of jargon here. We're
Yeah.
gonna try to break it down as easily as we can. So what strategies can we use when we support a student, based on those functions of behavior? Sometimes those get thrown around too. So what does that jargon mean?
Perfect. And that's kind of how I'm thinking this flow will work really well. We're going to talk about those behaviors and some possible interventions, but then we'll really go into the nitty gritty of that process of what Heather talked about, the FBA, BIP to get that specialized program. But
Sure.
sometimes I think it's helpful to kind of visualize what we're talking about before we go into the plan. So, functions of behavior. The easiest way to remember it is the acronym SEAT. Each letter stands for something different. So, one thing I want to mention, everyone engages in behavior. Heather and I are engaging in a lot of behavior right now. I'm moving my hands a lot while I talk. Heather's probably clicking on a mouse. Those are all behavior. So
Mhm.
behavior is not bad. It's just anything that we do. Sometimes behavior can impede our ability to interact in our environment. So that's what we're looking at. And
Mhm.
so the four functions would be S, that's if it's got a sensory component. E is going to be your escape or avoidance. A is attention, and T is tangible, access to tangible. What does that mean? So let's start with the easiest one that people can visualize attention. What does a student who's seeking attention look like? Maybe they're yelling out, maybe they're blurting things or saying really extreme things for a reaction. Or maybe they run out of the classroom and get down to the end of the hall and then they turn to see if anybody is running after them. Those are examples of when a child is trying to gain attention. Well, what does it look like when they're trying to escape? That's totally different. They usually don't want your attention at all. It's more like they are ripping up a piece of paper or they're hiding in a part of the classroom. Maybe they're screaming and crying during a lesson. So
Mhm.
it's not to gain attention, it's because they are trying to escape a demand.
Mhm.
Now, let's look at access to tangible. This is a pretty easy one. They're engaging in some type of negative behavior, and as soon as they get access to the item, it stops. Think little girl is crying at the checkout line of the grocery store. As soon as
Mhm.
mom hands her a candy bar, she stops crying. The crying was to gain access to the candy bar. And the last one, S, is sensory, and this is why I touched on it. Sensory is not bad at all, and we'll talk about when we would intervene on that. But a sensory seeker is maybe going to make a vocal noise to drown out sound. Maybe they're going to rock as a way to self soothe. Maybe they're going to flap hands as a self stimulatory behavior. Whatever they're
Mhm.
engaging in is meeting a sensory function. So
Mhm.
those are kind of the four that we're looking at. And there are a lot of antecedent interventions that you can use for these. So,
Mhm.
Heather, if you're good, I'm just going to roll right into those.
Keep going. Let's go.
Excellent. So let's go back through that same system and look at those behaviors and then possible things that you could do. Now, Heather and I, we have been in your shoes. I was a self contained teacher. I'm not saying that all of these are easy. I'm not saying all of these would work. These are just ideas to kind of roll around, see if any of them could help in your scenario. So, for
Mhm.
our kids that are trying to gain attention, maybe have a structured plan to give kids attention. As a teacher with a lot of things going on in the classroom, it can be really hard to remember to go back to Steve and give him some of that positive support that he's craving.
Yep.
So for sometimes I would have like a 30-second timer that reminded me, oh, Steve, you're doing a great job. Just so I'm continuously giving him what he needs,
Mhm.
which might help him in that environment. Other options you could look at is changing your seating arrangement. So those kids who need attention can be a little bit closer to you. Or
Mhm.
maybe you could try and heavily reinforce all of the expected appropriate behavior while not
Mhm.
giving attention to the unexpected behavior. So they learn, oh, when I raise my hand, that's when my teacher calls on me and we can engage. So
Mhm.
whenever you're putting intervention into place, you have to make sure that you're giving them opportunity to gain what they were originally trying to get, or it won't work. So if you're working on decreasing attention-seeking behavior, you have to provide a way for them to get attention in an appropriate,
Mhm,
meaningful way. Some ways that we could look at this for escape. So escape could mean a couple different things. Maybe they're escaping a demand, a task. Maybe they're escaping a situation, an environment that's too loud or too
mhm,
stimulating. So if it's more of work, could you decrease the number of problems that have to be completed? So if you're doing a math assignment and the worksheet has 20 problems, could they do 5 and showcase the skill and not have to go through 20 if that's a known overwhelming thing for them?
yep,
Or maybe you could give them 2 different tasks to complete to see if they had a choice of doing a worksheet or doing boom cards helps them feel more productive or able to access that assignment. You could also provide visual supports. So maybe it's they're not understanding what to do, and a quick visual can help them be more successful. Maybe you can provide visual cues if there's a change in a schedule, or if you know that loud environments are difficult for them, have headphones or have an alternative space for them to sit in. So we're kind of proactively thinking about why are they trying to escape this and what can we do to make it easier on them.
mhm,
Same thing with tangible. You you've gotta give the child an opportunity to access the item, assuming the item is an appropriate safe item, by the way. But if it is appropriate safe item, create opportunities for them to earn those items. Maybe set up a way for them to gain access. You could even
mhm,
use that item during a transition from a highly preferred to a non-preferred activity. But if a child really, really, really wants Legos and you never give them the opportunity to get Legos, think of, like, if you deprive yourself from cookies, at some point, you're gonna eat an entire box. That
mhm,
that desire, that urge is going to become overwhelming, and just by giving access to it on a way that works for you and the student can really
mhm,
decrease that problem. And the last one is for sensory seekers. So for the most part, I'm actually pretty fine with any behavior that a child is engaging in to get to that sensory component. Where
mhm,
I've become concerned is if the way that they're getting access to it is dangerous to them. A
mhm,
great example is if a child loves to chew, to bite down on something, and they're chewing on their finger, and it's
mhm,
making their finger bleed. Maybe
mhm,
I'll give them a tough chew that they could chew on, so they're getting that oral feedback without injuring themselves.
mhm,
And shift your classroom layout, or you could change the lighting. If you've got bright colors, transfer them to softer, more muted tones. Just anything that you can give them that same sensory input in a way that is safe for them. So I know that was a really quick list, but hopefully within there, you heard something that might work for your classroom and the children that you're supporting.
Yeah, for me, it's always about getting a student to have choice in
Mhm.
these options too. Like there might be a hard chew that you could give him or a soft something else, right? There's options that you could try and give them to pick. Do you want to do this work in 1 minute or 2 minutes, right? Do I care if you start in 1 minute or 2 minutes? Not really, but like start
Right.
when you can start, especially if it is attention seeking. You're like, hey, now I get to interact with you. Great. Do you want to start in 1 minute or 2 minutes? Oh, 2 minutes? Great. I'll come check back on you in 2 minutes. And then you, like you said, you can set that timer and come right back and go, hey, are we ready to start that work now? Great job. And giving that positive reinforcement, like, thanks for telling me that you wanted to start in 2 minutes. So like I love that, but like try to think of ways that you can bring your own students' thoughts into this process too, because I feel like sometimes that helps with the buy-in.
Absolutely, and ownership, giving them ownership of figuring out what they need to be successful because we are just one part of their lifetime. So if we can help them be able to figure out on their own, this is what makes me feel good. This is what helps me get through the day.
Yeah.
That's going to do way more for them long term. And that's what we're looking for is those long-term supports that can help them for the rest of their life.
Yeah, adding tools to their toolbox for sure. So I feel like I always get this question from maybe some newer teachers of like, how do I know when a behavior plan is working or not, right? We put this plan together, we've gotten there, and like, okay, fine, I'm seeing like the results that aren't there. Like they shouldn't be this way. Like, when do I know that I have to like rewrite the behavior plan or like what tell me more about that.
Absolutely. And this was one thing that I'll be honest, it was so frustrating when people would say it to me, but I'm going to say the same thing. It is sometimes gonna get worse before it gets better. So you've got to give the time for the intervention to work. So if you put it in on a Wednesday and it's not working on Friday, that's not surprising because we know that our students need consistency. We know that they need to continue to gain access to the same expectation. Just
Mhm.
think about when you start your classroom at the beginning of the school year. It's not by the end of the first week that all the students know the routines and expectations.
Mm.
It's often not by the end of the second week. It's sometimes not by the end of the fourth week. So for this child, if you're putting an intervention into place and it's different than what they learned at the beginning of the year, you could
Mhm.
expect it to take as much time for them to acquire. I
Mhm.
would say you've got to do the intervention plan of these 3 weeks consistently with fidelity. So what with fidelity means is everybody is following it and they're following it the exact way that it's written.
Mhm.
So when everyone's following it for the exact way that it's written and you've been doing it for about 3 weeks and you're still not seeing results, that's when you would start to say, gosh, maybe there's an element of this that's not working, and then go back to the table and adjust.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that seems so short too, especially like if there's like any pre-teaching skills that need to happen, teaching of your staff to ensure the fidelity is happening, right? Like I feel like there's a lot of that pre-teaching that like maybe we need to consider too in that like 3 to 4 weeks of implementation, uh,
Yes,
of
great addition.
actually putting it into like practice and like so the student is seeing that routine, that consistency, that focus that is from the plan. So yeah, I love that.
And as a nervous Nelly, I can't tell you how many times in meetings I would say, I'll put this intervention plan in effect tomorrow. And there was absolutely no way that I could get my staff trained. I could create those specialized materials. I could have time. It's okay to, at the team, say, this is a great plan. I need about a week before I can get it running because you want to get it running right.
For sure.
Don't be afraid that you're going to take some time. It's all part of the bigger picture of supporting them.
For sure. It's like starting a new IEP and implementing a new IEP goal, and then it's the end of the quarter that you have to report on this new goal that you just put in place. And you're like, but I have no data. Yeah, because you're doing all the pre-teaching. It's the same type of thought. So,
Mhm.
something else that I get a lot is maybe it's a teacher from a school that maybe has an autism specialist, but not necessarily a BCBA, or teachers are being told that they need to write the behavior plan. So can a teacher write a behavior plan?
So I will give everyone an insider secret. Heather and I talked about this because I am not 100% sure how I want to answer it. So I'm just going to give you guys very honest thought process here. When I was a teacher, I wrote all of my own behavior intervention plans. I did not have any training in behavior analysis. I wasn't a BCBA. I wasn't working in the field, but that was the expectation. And if you had told me prior to 2020, I would have said, of course, teachers do it. I remember the first time that I interviewed a BCBA for my own podcast, and they asked me, "So teachers shouldn't be doing it, right?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, m maybe,
Right.
maybe." And so this is what I feel like.
Yeah.
Teachers have so much on their plate.
Mhm.
If you have BCBAs that work in your county that you have access to, 100% they should be coming in to support you because that's our job. That's what we do. That is your option A, that is your best option. So what if, like Heather said, you don't think you have a BCBA? So they might be called a BCBA, they might be called a behavior specialist, they might be called an autism specialist. Have you ever heard of a psychologist doing it?
Mm.
There probably is somebody in the county who can support you. You've got to be the squeaky wheel, and you have to know. I found a lot of the times I had to know the right words to tell my principal who didn't have a background in special education, so she
Mhm.
know what words to use when she went to the admin level.
Mhm.
But what if it just doesn't exist? What if there are no BCBAs? What if there are no behavior analysts? You can do it yourself. You can do it yourself with tricks and tools that we're going to give you in this recording. I've got a lot of additional blog posts that I have to help of what I did when I was in the classroom. If you don't have access to a BCBA, still give it your absolutely best go. But if you do have access to a BCBA, don't be shy for asking for that help.
For sure. And I'll leave any of Nicole's links below or any other resources that I have that might be helpful for you if you are going through this process. Because, yes, I also wrote my own behavior plans for a while too. It was not pretty, but we did it. And somehow you realize the process and what you need to do to get through it. So, all right, let's switch a little bit and talk more about behavior goals. So maybe you have a behavior plan in place and now you want to focus more on a behavior goal so that we can meet and grow in the plan. So, what is your favorite way to take data on a behavior goal?
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to take it back to how we even get that behavior goal written out. Because I feel like before you can take data on it, you have to have a really clear picture of what the behavior is and what you're intervening on. And I know what you guys are thinking right now. I know why the child is doing the behavior. Like, that's not a question for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. This is one of my favorite examples that I actually had when I was teaching. And when someone said this to me, it's what clicked for me. So I had a child in my class who would always rip up their worksheets. And so my brain was like, oh, they're trying to escape. Oh, I know they don't like writing. I know that writing is really difficult. So
Mhm.
what did Miss Nicole do every time they ripped the worksheet? I was over at his side. It's okay, buddy. You can do hard things. Let's talk through different ideas. Let me get the OT involved. Let's get you some specialized pencil grips and paper that you can use. Could we try typing? You now have two people helping you. That child's behavior was maintained by attention. Every time he ripped the paper and I sprinted over to him, I was reinforcing his behavior. I kept my own problem going for like a month, thinking that I was giving this really amazing multi level support. And really, I was just making it the most reinforcing thing for him ever.
Mhm.
That's why it's so important to go through the process of figuring out the function of behavior.
Yeah.
What I want to walk you guys through, and this is how I take data, it's called an ABC sheet or an ABC data sheet. ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence. And this is always a question from people outside of the field. Consequence is not negative, consequence is just anything that follows up the behavior. So, the example that I used to memorize this, because I had to memorize all of these terms for my test, the one that I used to memorize this was every day when I get ready for work and I pack up my bag and I grab my keys, I walk over to a dog treat jar and I give my dog Buster a treat. So that is the chain. The antecedent is me putting on my bag and grabbing my keys. The behavior is me opening that treat jar and him running over, and then the consequence is he gets the treat. So I have taught him that sequence of behavior. His consequence for him
Mhm.
is amazing. He gets a treat every day.
Yeah.
That's how I have maintained that behavior by giving him that really high valued reward or
Mhm.
reinforcer. He runs over and engages in that behavior every day. So I
Mhm.
feel like that's a really good example just to explain that consequence is not bad. It's
Mhm.
just information that we're looking at. So we want to look at that ABC data, the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequence. And we want to analyze every single time that it's happening and figuring out, oh, is any of this stuff maintaining the behavior? Going back to
Mhm.
that example, if I had realized, oh, every single time I talk to the child, they engage in ripping the paper more, today I'm going to try not responding to that and see what happens. I maybe would have figured out faster that it was not maintained by escape of task, it was maintained by attention.
Mhm.
I'd love to take that antecedent behavior consequence data to give myself a much clearer picture of what's
Mhm.
going on in the classroom. From there, that's when you'll start to figure out those functions of behavior. This is where we want to move into that FBA BIB process if we are doing that more formal, structured support that Heather and I were talking about.
Mhm.
Your FBA is your functional behavioral assessment. And so, what this is a more formal way of going through all the times we see that behavior happening and talking about why do we think it's happening. And we're going to look at a variety of things. Is it always happening during a certain time of day? Is it always happening with a certain staff member? Is it always happening in a certain room? Does it always happen when someone speaks to them and it never happens when they're alone? It's going to give you all of that information so you can start to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What is the function of their behavior? And then the question is, do we need a behavior intervention plan? And the answer is not always yes. So sometimes
Mhm.
you're going to get to the end of it and you're going to realize, oh, my classroom wide management could just be slightly adjusted to encompass this need. So maybe it is needing choice. And maybe you think, oh, actually, I bet all of my students would like having more of an option of
Mhm.
their if they're going to do a task card or a worksheet. If it's something that you could implement at the classroom wide level or it's at tier two support that you're putting in, you don't necessarily need an intervention plan. The intervention plan is when you have a very specialized intervention that you're going to put into place. And again, that intervention has to meet the need of what the behavior was. So if again the child is engaging in behavior to escape a demand, me talking through their feelings is not going to help them the
Mhm.
way reducing visual clutter, reducing the feeling of overwhelm, giving
Mhm.
them choice is. So once we have that clear picture of this is why they're engaging in the behavior, this is the more appropriate way I'm going to have them engage in the behavior. Your behavior intervention plan then lists out the specific teaching strategies that you're going to use to teach that behavior because the child, the first time you offer them choice, is going to have no idea what to do. It's going to need to have explicit instruction, and the behavior intervention plan lays that out almost as a teaching guide so everyone knows how to support the student with this new goal.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like you said it the best way, and I don't feel like I could say it any better. But if you're feeling like, okay, Nicole, I have 100 more questions, you are welcome to comment below. I will make sure Nicole can get some answers for you if I don't have them. But any last minute tips and tricks, resources, websites that you have for us that you could share?
Absolutely. So one last thing that I want to throw in there before we move into some tips and tricks is well, I guess actually this is a tip or a trick. What I always ask myself when I did this in the classroom and now as a BCBA, there are three things that I look for in those interventions. Are they safe? Are they feasible? Are they sustainable?
Mhm.
If your intervention does not meet all three of those, it's not a good intervention. So
Mhm.
first, is it safe? So maybe the child, like we said, really likes engaging in some oral motor feedback, but you notice that they bite down on the chew and they're swallowing pieces of it.
Mm.
That's not a safe intervention.
Yeah.
So your intervention first has to be safe. Second, it has to be feasible. So
Mhm.
maybe your child wants the ability to go on a walk and you just don't have the staffing to do that. If you're teaching the child to advocate for their needs and you have walk as a choice of something that they can advocate for, but then you're not able to supply that choice, your word is worthless and that's going to break that bond, which
Mhm.
is then not going to help them. And as a teacher, we have a lot going on. So we've got to make sure that what we have is feasible. And the last one is sustainable. Is this sustainable? So let's say you have a child and you realize, oh, if I maybe put their task into a sensory bin with sand. So I take the task guard and I put it all in sand
Mhm.
and they're getting that sensory input to do it. Fantastic. Well, what if they're dumping the sand every week and by the end of Friday, your sand container is empty?
Mhm.
And what if you run out of your budget to replace sand in 2 weeks because you're paying for it out of your own pocket, you can't
Mhm.
afford it. And then
Mhm.
2 months down the road, you don't have any more sand, and that's what your child needed to gain access to their environment. Then it wasn't sustainable. So kind of
Mhm.
run through that checklist to make sure the intervention you're putting into place can actually be done.
Mhm.
And the other thing is the only behavioral intervention plan that will work is one that you can actually do. Again, going back to Nervous Nelly Nicole, I agreed to so many intervention plans that I knew there was no way I could implement just because they didn't know what to say in the meeting. And if I had been honest and said, my caseload is too full, I can't give this child attention every 5 seconds, it's not a feasible interval for me, I could have saved us a lot of trouble.
Mm.
So think about what you have to do all day, every day, and advocate. You can't implement it. Same thing with your data. The best data is data that you'll actually take. So make sure any data that you're taking on behavior goals or IEP goals in general is in a system and format that is easy for you and your staff to use.
Yeah, I think all of that is so important as well. Like, we get so wrapped up in like, let's create a great plan, but then you actually get down to it and I'm like, wait, I have to buy McDonald's for this kid every week? Like,
Right.
no, that's not manageable. It's not feasible to be able to do that. Financially, I cannot keep up with that. Unless family's on board and they're sending money too, right? They're helping this process. But again, like that's something you need to look at of like, is this manageable for us to do and partake in? So,
Mhm.
any other resources or websites that you want to direct us to? And of course, I will leave any of these links below so that everybody can check them out too.
Absolutely. So I will send Heather a couple of different blog posts I did. I actually have an ABC data sheet that you can download and start using. And I have a blog post that specifically writes out what each of those areas mean. So I will send her both of those and a couple of other blog posts that I have done that talk more in depth about behavior. It's something I'm really passionate about because I did not have this support when I was in the classroom. So I try to make it as accessible as I can for you guys now. And then another thing that I wanted to plug out there is I do have a behavior training bundle in my TPT store. And again, this was designed to help you guys who have no access to a BCBA, but still have really serious behavior that you need to intervene on. So if you need more help training your staff on intercedent interventions, those are the things we are talking about, like providing choice or
Mhm.
giving attention. There's a whole training packet you can use in there if you want some more help with reinforcement, teaching strategies, the prompting hierarchy, all of that. And fun fact, Heather actually consulted on this product with me and helped me make sure that it was easy to understand. And that's another resource. And at most, I've got a freebie that I'll send to Heather. Guys could download because why not? It's free. And it'll kind of give you an introduction to those basic behaviors that you could share with your staff just to get the ball rolling.
Awesome, Nicole. Really, thank you so much. I feel like there's so many great little nuggets and big nuggets in here that people can take and implement in their classrooms sooner rather than later. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and letting me ramble about behavior. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
We love you for it.